Welcome back to Unhinged Addiction. I am Eric Zink, and I go by the Mr. Impulsive on social media. Whether you follow on TikTok, it's Eric B. Zink on YouTube. And on today's episode of Unhinged Addiction, episode 10, I get a chance to speak with Nathan on what is porn addiction. Now, I met Nathan through Sunflower Sober. And if you don't know what Sunflower Sober is, it's an app. And this app is for addiction, and it's a sobriety counter, but it has a 24-hour AI sponsor, which is amazing, that you can talk to and just get support anytime you need it. It has journaling, and it teaches you how to journal and understanding what journaling is, just to find out what your urges and cravings are. It's amazing because a lot of us don't know how to journal. It also has a bunch of resources when it comes to addiction, and I think it's a phenomenal app. And through this, I had the opportunity of working with Nathan, and I noticed by just the way he was talking that, he knew what addiction was. And a lot of times when we think addiction, we think of drugs, you think of a substance. Some people really even struggle when it comes to like nicotine addiction, trying to count that in as an addiction. But porn addiction, gambling addiction, these are things that don't even really involve a substance, but it is an addiction. It is something that a lot of people out there struggle with. And when it comes to porn, I think it's almost one of those that it's harder to talk about than it is like cocaine or alcohol, because it's something that's very, it's not spoken about. It's very, can be very ego shattering. It can be very detrimental to relationships, and it is an addiction. And trying to understand porn addiction, I think, is very key when understanding addiction in general. I think a lot of people do struggle when it comes to porn or to sex more than they want to admit, because it does release dopamine. It is something that you become obsessed with. And so Nathan was awesome enough to do this podcast with me. We did one before this, and unfortunately I screwed up and I didn't have any of the audio. So this time I had to redo it with him. Still was great. And I just want to cut you in now to our conversation on really what is porn addiction, and starting to understand and comprehend and learn what it is.
Just keep that in mind. I don't even know what that means, really. I may be more careful about like using sensitive terminology.
Yes, I know, dude. You know what? It's funny is this is I think that's perfect lead into I think why it's important to have support in people like when it comes to addiction and different struggles, because we are different around like family and everyone else versus somebody who's an addict. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Or somebody who gets it. Because I have the same thing. My father-in-law came today.
yeah.
And if I talk super loud, it will echo through our house, and he could sit and hear everything I say. And I actually did a test podcast right before this with a guy I know from a rehab that I worked with in California on cocaine and stuff. And I was like, okay, it records, thank God.
Yeah.
But
Good, man. You got your system dialed in. Hey, are you moved into your new spot now?
somewhat, we're still in. I have to go back to our rental on Monday and still probably have about 5 truckloads worth of crap. And
All that Pokemon stuff you got in your backgrounds, that's what it is.
yeah, no, that my nerdery area got moved in real quick.
Yeah, I'm sure. All the
had, to
all
have,
the all the good stuff.
had to have the reprieve, where you just disappear to when you need to.
Yes, I'm in that spot. I've been thinking a lot about how to upgrade this place because right now it's just an office, but I'd like to do a lot with it. But one thing you did say though, so like if I can bring us back to like recovery,
Yeah,
um, I want to be the type of person that, aside from like being vulgar and like, a lot of people that are in recovery for a long time can start to get a little loose about their language. Like, oh, did you beat it? Did you beat off or something? Like, you can sort of joke around about that sort of thing now that you've gathered some. Like, it's not funny in the beginning, but after
hmm
you get deep into recovery, like using that kind of language can be normalized. But my one of my guiding lights is I want to be the type of person who is the same no matter who I'm around. So if I'm talking to Eric, if I'm talking to Kobe, if I'm talking to Corey, my wife, if I'm talking to my friend down the street, like I am Nathan, the same Nathan, no matter where I'm at. And of course, I'm not going to engage everyone in recovery, but here's a quick example. We went to Kansas City for the Super Bowl. This is the third year in a row that we went, and we went to my aunt and uncle's house to watch the Super Bowl. And the last 2 years, Kansas City won. This year, it didn't go so well.
right.
But my cousin and his wife came over to visit for the day, or for part of the day. And I hadn't seen them for many, many years. And I had heard through the grapevine that like my cousin's wife had struggled with alcoholism and that it wasn't very good.
Right.
And so she was there today, and I had forgotten, or she was there that weekend popping in, and I had forgotten about that. But my uncle brings up sunflower to like me and then my cousin and his wife. And I was like, I guess I'm going to be talking about this now, not thinking that like, her name is, well, I won't say her name, but my cousin's wife, I didn't know she was in recovery and all this kind of stuff, and I just kind of forgotten about the alcoholism. But I kind of just started opening up about my story and about I'm working on with Sunflower. I'm kind of leading some design efforts there. This is so on par with like what lights me up. Design is just my profession, and recovery is like my mission almost. And so like you merge those things together and man, like that's like my ideal environment. And the reason this is relevant to me is because I've been in recovery for 7 years. And then so she starts opening up about her recovery. And here we are. We're just going. And I talk about what I've been addicted to and like what recoveries look like. And so I think my whole point in saying that is when I'm open to talk about it. If there's a little like window to talking about it, I'll open the window, and talk about it. And I found that it just leads to really good things. Like if you are honest and vulnerable about your own recovery with drugs and alcohol, with pornography, with whatever your addiction, of choice is, if you're just kind of open about that and in a vulnerable way, it opens other people up too. And then magic starts to happen relationally and support wise. I don't know. Have you found that to be true? I mean, you have found it to be true.
It's
You're on
it's
TikTok and all these things, and people are just opening up to you because you've shown that vulnerability. Uh,
it's super true, and I think it's so important, and I think you know this too because you lead a recovery group on porn. I do a lot with drugs.
yep.
Both are addictions, but we also know what it's like when that newcomer or that new person realizes that they have a problem. They're newer to sobriety, not sure. Like, do I tell everybody this is my problem? Um, you're ashamed and all this. So I
Yeah.
think that when especially when people have been in this for a while, take that just open-minded, dude, I know what it's like. You're there and you kind of just dive into that conversation and make yourself really vulnerable. They feel comfortable, and it's almost like this breath of fresh air of like, oh my god, somebody understands me. Because like you put it, your cousin, her partner or husband probably isn't an alcoholic or an addict, so he doesn't get it.
Yeah.
Like even my wife, she doesn't get it. Like she can go drink a glass of wine, and she can drink wine and stuff in front of me, or drink in front of me, and it doesn't bother me.
Yeah.
But I'll look at her sometimes, and I'll be like, I just can't believe you can have one.
Dude, 100%, dude. I actually just had that conversation the other day. People, I've gone in and out of drinking the last several years. I've just recognized that alcohol is not healthy for me. And I'm so jealous of people who can just like have a drink and then it's just one. It's like you put a bottle of wine in front of me and like suddenly it's like starting to disappear in one night. And it's just like, why am I, and I'm smart enough now to understand that's just kind of how I'm wired. It's like I'm an extremist and I'm either all in or I'm not in at all, and that can work really well in a lot of ways for a lot of things. But with unhealthy with substance abuse, it can't happen that way. With certain behaviors, it can't happen that way. And I've got to be nothing instead of everything. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely, I do, and I think it comes into addiction is addiction, and just I mean I think addictions can transfer and stuff like that, and
Oh yeah.
it's fascinating to me. Like I have a good friend of mine who was actually a sponsor for me for a while, who he was a big meth addict, and his stories with talking about meth and stuff is just insane.
Yeah.
And he will go out though once a month or whenever, and we'd go out every now and then, and he'd have like one drink.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, you shouldn't be doing that though. You're a meth addict. He's like, you know what? He's like, I used to really be like hardcore, like 12 steps, all that. He's like, I don't understand what it is. With alcohol, it's so different than with meth. Like meth,
Okay.
it's done. And I'm
Yeah.
like, no, it kind of makes sense. Like I can take pain pills, like I can take opiates and stuff like that, and half the time I end up throwing them out because I don't use the full prescription I'm even
Yeah.
given because I know what they are and what they can do. It's not it doesn't hit my drug of choice.
Sure.
And but it's weird how we have these other things that just creep in though.
Oh
And
yeah.
there is no moderation. Like I really, a lot of what you had said, like when we talked originally, I was so bummed that it didn't record. Like I was geeked that night, and I was all like just ready to go. I did this whole intro and stuff for it, and then
Yeah.
there was no volume. I'm like, motherfucker.
Yeah. That
Um,
sucks, man. That was a good conversation.
I know, but it had me even thinking of like how sex and stuff was very obsessive with me, and it helped
Yeah.
trauma with me. It helped me feel seen and wanted, um, and it played a lot into like I didn't. I get people who hit me up and they'll ask about like gambling, like they'll get drunk and they'll go gamble, or they'll get
Yeah.
high and gamble, and it was like, man, I never got high and gambled, but I would get high, pop Viagra, and go have sex nonstop,
Yeah.
because it fed into my validation and being seen and not having to use alone and this obsessive compulsive fucked up behavior I had.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
just
It's like it's almost like it's like a distraction from the, I don't know, dude. You're like using, because was your drug of choice like cocaine? Is that what
yeah,
it?
cocaine and alcohol were my drugs of choice.
Okay, so yeah, like you've got this, you're managing this cocaine addiction, and you take your cocaine, and then it sort of feeds into, what is it called? Is it called comorbidities or like I heard one time that it said that if you have one addiction, there's likely like others attached to it, and maybe they're
Mm-hmm.
not the primary one, but like secondary. For me, that was alcohol, and then also to a lesser degree, but also food. Food
Mm-hmm.
is one for me, dude. And I know that's like, if you're looking at the scale of like substances that are like, food, we all have to eat food. None of us have to like do meth. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so it's like one of those, that's like the last frontier, or I don't even wouldn't call it frontier, but like that's stuff that I'm still managing to this day. But the concept is like wherever you have one addiction, there's likely like peripheral addictions that are sort of like involved there. And that sounds like similar to what you were talking about. And I'm not sure, I don't understand why that is. I'd like to actually dig deeper in that. Like, what is it there that, why does an addict typically have more than one sort of go-to substance or behavior or whatever? That's an interesting one, but I've noticed that about myself. It doesn't surprise me at all to hear you say that.
Yeah, no, and a lot of why because I did, it's actually this really big rabbit hole you could go into because there are very obsessive behaviors. And even when it comes to addiction, a lot of people will have like essentially a drug of choice. Like if I was to say what my drug of choice was, it was alcohol. Alcohol was essentially my drug of choice.
Yeah.
I didn't just wake up one day and go, you know what, I'm going to snort an 8 ball of cocaine.
Yeah.
I woke up and I'm drunk and I had a friend go, hey, you want to do a line? Sure.
Yeah.
Doing that great makes me kind of feel good, whatever, but I love alcohol.
Yeah.
And I just, next time I was around it, yeah, absolutely. I'll have some more, it became more and more just normalized, and I would just kind of absorbed it into my plethora of addictions.
Yeah.
And even when it came to like, what sex and stuff would do for me, because it feed that dopamine still, and
Yep.
it fixed the boredom. And also, when you're getting high and you're drinking, what are you gonna do?
Yeah.
Like what really? It's not socially acceptable to be sitting at the dinner table with your kids and wife and stuff and start doing lines of coke off the table. So you're
Yeah.
not going to do it at home, and you're not going to do it around people that you care about per se. So you're going to do it. You're either going to go do it alone, but it's you don't want to be alone. So now all of a sudden your guys typically don't just hang out together and do coke. Sometimes they do.
Yeah.
And then you're at a bar or whatever, or there's women out there too. And then, hey,
Yep.
okay, what can I do that euphorically makes me feel even better? Well, sex.
Yeah.
I would be at like 2 a.m. in the morning
Yeah.
doing hot plating fucking coke, doing rails of coke. Nobody be up,
Yeah.
but I'm up. I'm sweating bullets. So I would just fucking log into my computer, dude, and just start watching fucking porn.
Yeah.
and just
Yeah, man.
start trying to yank one off to a dead thing because I'm just high as a kite, but it's like killing time for me. And I'd be like, oh man, 20 minutes has went by. Let me go do another line. You know what I mean? It just kind of filtered into this whole obsession behavior.
Yeah, man. One of the themes that I'm hearing and that resonates with me is like isolation. Like when you're doing lines and you're alone, you're obviously not with anyone you probably love. Or if you do love them, there's probably some unhealthy dynamic if you're both doing it.
Right.
Um, but I think, you probably in those hours, yeah, and I want to root this in my own experience so that I'm not making stuff up. But I think in the depths of your addiction and when you're acting out, there's like so much isolation, or it leads to isolation, and then you need to do something about that to make yourself feel better. And I know I talked about this in the last time we talked, but there's this book that written by Patrick Carnes called oh, what's it called? It's called Out of the Shadows, and it's about sexual addiction. And he talks about the addiction system. And I'm looking over here because I wrote it on the wall. But the addiction system starts with a belief system, and then the belief system leads to impaired thinking, and then you get into the addiction cycle. That leads to an addiction cycle, which starts with preoccupation, thinking about what you're going to do. Then it goes to ritualization, sort of like starting to engage in the thing you're going to do. Then it leads to like in my case, it was like sexual compulsivity, like acting out.
Mm-hmm.
And that leads to despair.
Mm-hmm.
So like I think that there's probably some commonalities there where there's just like you're just, dude, you're in your room, you're doing lines, you're not like you're feeling super high but maybe super low at the same time, and you sort of need to like you need to do something about that because you're in this like place of despair. And I think these addictions, like they're all like escape hatches, like
Mm-hmm.
we just want to not feel this way anymore. We need to feel something that isn't this because this hurts. This is painful. We'll do anything but feel that. You know what I mean? Um,
No, absolutely. Because, and you could probably relate to this a lot of like the whole buildup and everything to it, the thinking about it, the obsession of as obsessing about it, you're giving yourself mental permission for it, all this stuff. That is like it's you thrive on this energy almost to the act of actually doing it. You feel like shit,
yeah,
and then when it's done, you feel like shit.
yeah,
And then it's almost like it's like, okay, well, let me get back to where I was feeling good, which kind of goes back to that whole obsessing about it, to thinking about, like you had said
it's
with
the
what you
cycle.
wrote down. It is that cycle completely, and
Yeah.
it's amazing how many people you meet that when they're doing whatever their addiction is, how shitty they feel in the act of actually doing it.
Yeah, man. I think there's this, and when we say feeling down, like when we say feelings, we're talking about like mental and emotional stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Physical stuff is like a separate thing, but I think we're
Right.
talking about mental and emotional sort of place where we're at. Even
Yeah,
dude, like
the
even
guilt, the all those emotions that filter in your brain, even while you're doing it, and you're trying to like block those out as
yeah,
you're, you know.
dude, yeah, you've got your tunnel. I mean, so many times I like would get sort of tunnel vision. I'm like, I don't care what else, like, and this would be an hour before acting out. I would just be like, I have tunnel vision. I'm gonna do this, and that's the preoccupation and the ritualization that I'm talking about. Is just like an hour or two before I'm like engaging in like activity. I'm thinking about it. I'm preparing to do it. It's just like one track mind. And
Mm-hmm.
for so long, I was just like, how do I turn that off? How can I, it's like, if I need to like change my mind, how do I do that? Like, how do I do that? It's just it's what happens in me. I don't know. Like,
Right.
you know what I mean? Like it
Mm-hmm.
almost feels like something outside of me is making me do these things. And yeah, man, I've unpacked that a little bit over time, but I think it's very much rooted in a belief system about myself. And um, yeah,
I know a lot of mine was rooted belief system, and I really had to rewire a lot of it. It was weird how I built a belief system around lies that I had to make the lies come true. Because if I proved a lie wrong, I proved a core belief of mine wrong.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of abandonment challenges, and so I had to make sure people left me. And when
Yeah.
they left me, it was never my fault. I was always the victim, and I needed to play poor me. And I had this cycle. I mean, I've been married 5 times.
Yeah.
And the cycle was like every 4 years is with a marriage, it's coming to an end. It was never my fault type deal, but even with longer term relationships and stuff, that's why I laugh with my wife now. I'm like, well, somehow you've broken this cycle. I don't know how,
Yeah.
but it was one of these things that like once it hit to a certain point, I would self sabotage myself that I didn't deserve this love. It's
Yeah.
coming to an end, and if I waited too long and I could prove it wrong that this wasn't coming to an end, now all my life that I've lived around these beliefs is all a lie. And you don't mentally know how to even handle or cope with it. So you just self sabotage. I mean, this was like the huge underlying factors I learned of my addictions, what fueled a lot of my addictions. Because
Yeah.
if I threw in drugs and I threw in alcohol and everything else, it was all these other coping tools I had that also enabled me to be the victim still. It enabled me to push people away. And
Yeah.
it's amazing how you don't realize that you want somebody close, but at the same time you're like, get the fuck away from me. And
Yeah,
and
dude.
it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. I mean, dude, I'm so curious about why this marriage is different. And I wonder what like for you, I wonder what how long have you been married now?
So we got married, and we say married by we'll never be legally married.
Okay.
We have agreed to that, and it
You're
was
like
something
that.
I agreed.
That's like a jinx on the marriage. Is that
Yes.
what it is? Yeah.
Well, that, but she's also been married before, and I've been married before. And
Okay.
I went through a really nasty divorce, and she went through a really nasty divorce. And so we
Yeah.
were like, yeah, we have powers of attorney and stuff over each other. We have a house together. Like we're married except on paper.
Sure. I get it.
So we say August 22nd or August 22 is when we got married, essentially.
Okay.
And what was different this time is I tried to do the same pattern with her. So what happened with my wife now is I got in trouble with Snapchat. So I had this huge following and I had Snapchat at the time, and I would have these girls hit me up all the time
Yeah.
and send me naked pictures and all this stuff. I don't know where they live in Maine or whatever. I'm
Yeah.
in, Idaho.
Yeah.
Which is it's emotionally cheating and stuff. But these people just they gave me attention, and I
Sure.
thrived on attention.
Yeah.
Um, and she saw it, was really upset. I did the whole poor me victim thing. She's like, "Fuck you." She's like, "That's all on you."
Yeah.
We're breaking up, and I'm
Yeah.
like, "Oh, wait, So I'm trying to play the victim, thing, and she's like, "No," she would not give me the victim side of it.
Yeah.
And then I call my mom because I was always big in manipulating everyone. My mom was like, "Fuck you."
Yeah.
She's like, "Don't ever fucking call me again for help or whatever." I'm just like,
Yeah.
what? Like,
Yeah.
what the fuck?
Yeah.
Um, and so she was the first person that actually stood up to me. And what made it different this time, instead of just the definition of insanity and doing the same thing over and over again, is I found a true trauma therapist. And I found 10 of them. And I
Wow.
said 10 appointments.
Yeah.
Because I'm very obsessive and weird about numbers and even stuff. And I was like, I need to find help. I need to do something different. Found out about trauma therapy. Scheduled these 10 different therapists at different times. And it's kind of like was my interview thing of like, let me
Yeah.
find one that I vibe with. I got
Yeah.
to tell them the truth. First lady I went to was phenomenal. I canceled all the rest and just stuck with her.
Oh wow.
And I went through a lot of trauma therapy with her.
Yeah.
Very open, very real. Like if you would have asked me in 2021 if I had abandonment issues, I'd be like, fuck no. I
Yeah.
didn't have any family issues. I had no problems whatsoever. Um, and she's the one that kind of drew it all out of me and realizing how I would just pack up all my trauma and just kind of keep it in a box, and I would
Yeah.
use it to dictate how my life was.
Yeah. Dude,
So
I would love to hear more about that. in my recovery journey, there's been a lot of trauma, like identifying and working through traumas as well. What you just said was very similar to me, man. I grew up in a great household. I, my parents are still married today. They've always been together. I grew up in like a Christian home, and like nothing was wrong. Everything was perfect. And I think, I don't know, there's something about, I wonder why addicts deny that they have trauma. That's an interesting concept. But I have very similar, like I have the same thing. Like, oh, all of a sudden I did this work and I was like, whoa, there's a lot here. And some of
Uh-huh.
it's like little things, and some of it's not like, um, yeah, some of it is little things, but have a profound impact on me. Like my father loved me, but there was he was like not emotionally attuned to me in my childhood, in my most critical time of my childhood. And that had a significant impact on me. He was not there when I needed him to be there. He was there physically, and we'd have
Hmm.
conversations, but there was something there that like I was not like emotionally, like he was not emotionally attuned to me when I really needed it. And I think there's some like trauma involved in that, because I looked for other things to kind of like meet those needs. But dude, yeah, and then there's some other trauma that I managed that had a significant impact on like my addiction. Like it really fueled it. You know what I mean? For
Hmm.
me, it was just like being bullied in middle school. Like that, it killed me. It really hurt me. You know what I mean? It wasn't physical. It
Yeah.
was all like emotional and verbal and everything. There was
Hmm.
all verbal bullying,
Yeah.
no physical bullying, but like it crushed me, man. I really needed that. I needed affirmation, and like and words of affirmation is like my love language.
Hmm.
And like I got none of that from my friends. You know what I mean? I was like, what are friends? I don't even know what friendship really looks like. Um,
Uh-huh.
so yeah, dude. I mean, and that was all happening like while I was warming up, like I don't know, say warming up, but like booting up this addictive system. Because that hurt a lot, and I needed, like I said before, I wanted to not feel the pain of like rejection and like emotional like pain and stuff like that. I needed to not feel that, and so porn was like becoming very that became this like out for me when when I was suffering in the middle of all that. That became this out, where it's like, I know this is wrong somehow, but I don't, at least in these moments, I don't feel the pain that I do at school, when I don't know if my friends are going to be friendly to me or make fun of me. You know what I mean?
No, dude, I totally get it. And I get it in like how you had said, like, I'm curious on your experience with this. So, because I can't relate necessarily to the porn side as much as, so I used to cheat left and right.
Yeah.
I cheated on three of my marriages. I cheated. Two
Okay.
of them I didn't.
Yeah.
And when it came to even in just dating and relationships and stuff, I guess I kind of just looked at women differently in that aspect of like what sex. Sex was just sex to me.
Yeah.
And it made me feel good. It made me feel temporarily good, and I would use it as I would almost like put people in a position where I could justify cheating, and I would subconsciously, in my own way of whether or not talking about stuff or communicating correctly about stuff, set them up to piss me off,
Yeah.
so I could justify in my head I could go cheat on them.
Sure.
And it was one of the most sickest things ever, and that's why I think like with even as addicts and stuff we have trouble like admitting to a lot of this stuff, because it just breaks down to some of the most basic things in life that we just ran from, and we came up with these whacked out creative fucked up ways to try and maneuver and heal through it, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
man. I mean, what you're saying is, we're like addicts are geniuses at like rationalizing our behavior,
Yes.
because if we rationalize it in our mind, somehow we can escape the pain
Mm-hmm.
of doing the dude. Like, we both know that like if you cheat on your wife, that's a pretty horrible thing to do. And you know what? Being the one who's doing the cheating, it hurts to hurt someone.
Mm-hmm.
And then even telling the person and working through confrontation, nobody wants to do that. It would
Right.
be incredibly painful. And so if
Hmm.
you rationalize in your mind, here's all these reasons why this is okay. Here's all the reasons why. Well, she hurt me. This is hurting her. So it's like, or you know what I mean? Like it's this
Yeah.
balancing act almost like, but we rationalize our behavior away so that we can manage, um, being. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Just like
No,
manage being alive is like we have to somehow because these things hurt so much. Um, and
and it's
I mean, I don't know. I'm afraid of pain like that, man. I'm afraid of hurting people. I'm
yeah,
afraid of like telling people that I did something that hurts them. Like that I'm terrified of it because I don't want to hurt other people.
right. It isn't it amazing too how many addicts you talk to. It doesn't matter if it's sex, gambling, any of this. Like a lot of them have that in common where they don't want to hurt people.
Yeah.
You know what they don't, and I think that's why we shy away so much from people who aren't addicts. And even when it comes to our addiction, is it's like our addiction can't hurt us
Yeah.
like people can. You
Yeah.
know, my wife can emotionally hurt me. She can hurt my soul. Where alcohol or cocaine, if I use this much, this is going to be the feeling. It's almost like this false sense of control around it. That if I do this, this, and this is how it's going to make me feel, and it makes me feel good.
Yeah.
And I'll never let it down, and it will never be disappointed in me. It will never be mad
Mm.
at me. It will never be angry at me. It will never be aggressive. You know, all these things.
Yeah.
And it's almost like we kind of just fall into this escape where we think then we can have this under control, and this can be like our little escape gym that starts to consume our entire life.
Yeah, dude. I mean, the whole control thing is, none of us have full control over anything. We have
Mm-hmm.
control over like what comes out of our mouth, and what we put in our mouth. And you
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? But like, we can't control what other people do. We can't control how people will respond to us. And yeah, that's something that I've thought a lot about is it's like, I love being in control because like, dude, even as a father in my own household, I sort of want to like hold the control, like wield this control over my family.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just impossible to do. And a lot of frustration is born out of that because I can't control other people. And so my response to when people don't do something like in my family with my kids, if they don't do what I want them to do, turns out some kids don't do what their parents want them to do.
Yeah, it
But
happens. It
my
does.
response to that adds up, right? My response to that is often like anger, but I think it's like really what's underneath the anger is like fear. Like I can't control this person. That makes me afraid to some degree. And
Mm-hmm.
my response to that fear is anger and kind of like getting big. And so yeah, I don't know where it's
It's
going with that, but I think
but
there's something there about control.
no, it really is though, because and that's where it would always lead me to a lot of times in that type of situation, it would lead me to alcohol, or it would lead me to like where I just wanted to get fucked up.
Yeah.
I wanted to escape it because I didn't want to be mean to somebody. I didn't want to blow up and get angry. I didn't know how to voice my feelings of disrespect, whether there was or not, whether I was making it up in my head, whether like so much of it broke down into like basic little communication breakdowns and misunderstandings in the smallest regard. But I would take it so personal. I'd be personal attacks on me.
Mm.
And now you hurt me. And it was just so much buildup of pain that I had stored that that cup was already overflowing. So anything else I added to it just kept overflowing. And so it was like, if I could just make this go away right now. And
Mm.
that made the world go quiet, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, man.
Um,
What do you think, like, how has that changed for you over the years? Like, for you has been like the, how have you come to manage that in your recovery now? Like through your sobriety, and recovery, like what have you learned about that has, I don't know,
that,
brought you to today or helped you in those scenarios? Because
that first,
we don't have these escape hatches like for people that are living in recovery, like these sort of unhealthy like escape hatches or like behaviors that sort of soothe us from the hard pain and whatever. We've taken those off the table.
Mm-hmm.
And the longer you do recovery, like I've found that like I've taken like more stuff off the table. Like initially it was like, don't go to these websites or don't like do these activities. And now it's just like, well, maybe I shouldn't have social media on my phone. Seems like scrolling like endlessly for hours a day. There's something eerily similar to like my like really unhealthy addictions and like this. Like I don't feel great about doing this and whatever. So I've started to like we call it in recovery, we call it moving the goalposts.
Mm-hmm.
Is like, once you've sort of like moved away from, you know, the core sort of activity, then you're sort of like, well, but these things upstream sort of lead to that activity. So I'm going to take those things off the table. And so all you keep moving up and up and upstream. And then all of a sudden, like, I mean, I've got so many websites blocked that literally billions of people go to every day.
Right.
And I just find that like if I kind of engage in these sort of behaviors, then it can lead me down a path and not on the daily, but like over time, if I'm engaging in these
Right.
upstream behaviors, they typically will kind of like move towards acting out. And there's one other thing I was going to say is there's this guy named Matt Dobschutz who has a podcast called Porn Free Radio. And he basically he has a lot of good stuff. He's been doing this for years, but he says you're either moving away from recovery or towards it. And so any activity that you're doing, you can ask yourself, like, am I moving towards like recovery in this instance or away from it? And, if you're binge watching your 12th, season of whatever, like this week, like, are you moving towards it? I don't know. That's a little bit more like, I don't know. I think
No,
over
it's
time, you
very
start to think
true,
about
and
things differently.
dude, you said so much there that I could unpack for like literally hours, and I'm talking. I mean, legitimately, this like you hit so many different things that fired me off of like, oh, this and this and this.
Yeah.
A good one is my like I love Pokemon cards and Magic cards.
Yeah.
That's essentially an addiction for me.
Yeah.
It can get so bad that I will snake trickle money here and there and won't tell my wife, and I'll go and buy more money than what I should in them, and I won't even open them up at home. I'll open them up in my car, and
It's a
I'll
secret.
justify all of this.
Yeah.
And then I open them up, and I didn't get what I wanted, so now I feel like shit.
Yeah.
So man, do I
Spend
go
this
buy some
money.
more? But something that I really actually have to keep in check because
Yeah.
that's how my personality is. And even when it comes to like social media, um, the biggest trouble I have, like I don't scroll social media.
Yeah.
Even though I do social media, I don't watch much of it because it angers and upsets me.
Yeah.
And so I decided myself like I didn't want to be angered and upset.
Mm. Wise
So
move.
so yeah, so like I will watch like things sometimes that I like I'll watch like people opening up packs. I learned if I watch people open up packs and watch what they
It gives
did,
you the same feeling.
yeah, I get the same feeling. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
cool. Stuff like that. But even like with my own videos, like I don't really read a lot of the comments.
Yeah.
And I made that mistake actually just the other day, and it fired me up because I was
Yeah.
like, people are just dumb.
Yeah.
And I found myself arguing with people on the internet
Yeah.
over a Schedule 4 opiate, which is tramadol. It's an opiate. It's
Okay.
opiate. If it is addictive or not. And I'm like, it's a Schedule 4 opiate, folks. This is an opiate. It is more powerful than codeine cough syrup, which is in lean. So, and it was just, it blew my mind.
Yeah.
It reminded me of how stupid a lot of people are. And I don't mean that in the thing, but a lot of people just want to pipe up because they're not heard at home or whatever it might be.
I mean, the comment section is like the bottom of the, you know,
Oh
it's
yeah.
like bottom feeding, man. It's just like that's where all the I don't know. Like I've seen some comments on some of your stuff, and it's really like there's some good stuff in there. It's like people being honest, people like asking for help, other
Uh-huh.
people responding to that. So there's like a lot of healthiness happening there. And then there's also like some trolls and some
Oh
people
yeah.
that just want to get it, like they're putting their mitts on and they want to go. And it's just like I think, your job would be how do I just see that for what it is and just decide not to engage. But I can imagine, like, dude, if you're getting tens of thousands of comments a week, like,
Oh yeah.
I mean, as a person who spends a lot of time building or creating content, I can understand how that would be a struggle for you or a challenge, you know?
Yeah, and so that's where part of what I do is, and even like in a sense, my recovery is I know what sets me off,
Yeah.
and so I just have to have those healthy boundaries, and it is what it is. And nope, I haven't seen that. What does it fill me in? You know, and if
Yeah.
I'm curious about it, let me fact check it myself and all that cool, and I'll have this conversation with you. It might take me a day or two to have this because I want to make sure I know what I'm now talking about.
Yeah.
Another big one too, though, like you had even mentioned, of my addictions and my cheating and everything, and I can even use this to porn and stuff, is when I start inner dialogue and inner conversations in my head is when I know I need to speak up.
Ah.
And I embrace the friction. My wife is very strong willed and strong minded like I am. And when we have a talk, it does not start off sweet and nice. It usually starts off, I've learned I'm more patient than she is. So she's usually the one that storms off.
Yeah.
And I don't chase her down because it's like I know how friction and stuff. I know our relationship well enough, and I respect
Yeah.
it well enough of how we have to cool down. And our relationship, when we have these kind of, I like to call them like friction conversations because we just had one here just very recent.
Yeah.
So it's very explosive and loud voices and lots of friction. And as we go down, it desensitizes some and we become more and more real. And this is where it's hit me and my trauma and my experiences and mine. And like
Mm.
have these very intelligent conversations. But I learned, because I'm a lot of a control freak, I used to look for responses right fucking now. You need to tell
Yeah.
me right now.
Yeah.
I embrace the process. I know
Yeah.
our communication process is 2 to 3 days, and
Yeah.
that's okay.
Dude,
And
that's so good, man. I mean, that's like pro marriage stuff right here. Is like number one, you're attuned to how you and your wife communicate. And also you've adapted yourself to I don't I would say compromise, but you've adapted yourself around your spouse when it comes to like, hey, like getting answers right now is just not, it doesn't lead to like good relationship with my wife. So kudos to you, man. Like this, those are like some pro marriage moves. So it makes sense why you're sticking around with this one because you're like you've got some pro moves.
yeah, no, and it's and like our communication is there, and like I used to, we've went through even periods where she's in bed and I know that she's tired or whatever, so all right, sex is off the table. I'll just go rub one out. And now, next thing you know, it's been all of a sudden a week and we haven't had sex. And I don't realize in her head that starts playing off of like, is he not finding me attractive? And then I'll
Mm,
start noticing that she'll start talking more of how, she doesn't feel good about herself or whatever it is. And I'll be like, oh shit, dude, like,
yeah,
I'm neglecting this.
yeah,
And it's weird out in some cases. It's like you actually kind of try to do something out of being kind and not like, I don't want to sit there every night and be like, hey, we need to have sex. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah.
Um, but then to go, okay, what's that healthy balance?
Dude, that's a conversation you can have with her. Like
Mm-hmm.
that you may say this and she may say that, and then you need to figure out what's gonna work. But
Yeah.
like the pro tip there for me is just like setting expectations around
Mm-hmm.
like what intimacy is gonna look like between you two
Mm-hmm.
so that you're both on the same page. Because if you're like, hey, once a week or twice a week is like our agreement and then it's not happening, then you know that you need to come together, or you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
set the expectations with each other so that you like, and then if the expectations aren't met, then you set expectations for what should happen then. You know what I mean? Like
Uh-huh.
it's a very simple thing. It's a lot harder to do than it sounds, but just setting expectations around all this kind of thing, whether it's like intimacy or like who's doing the dishes or who's taking like making lunches for the kids in the morning or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a wise move to set expectations with your wife, so that there's no missed communication, no frustration because she's not meeting your expectations or you're not meeting her. Like we both know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, man. There's so
And
much good
it,
there.
and it really is. And that's the thing is, I think, is letting people know what your expectations are. Because we
Yeah,
don't, half the time you don't tell somebody what your expectations are. And then you're pissed off because they didn't meet your
right.
expectations, but they had no idea you even had them.
100%.
You
Yeah.
know, and that was one of the driving underlying factors of a lot of my addiction was is people would let me down and fail me, and now you hurt me or whatever. And you know, a lot of mine broke down. I had a very similar kind of childhood, you know, with my dad. My dad loved me. I know he did. I before my dad killed himself, we had a very good relationship.
Wow.
But one, I had a dad who committed suicide, so that fucks you up. But even before that, you know, I had a dad who wasn't very emotionally available.
Yeah.
You know, we didn't have these deep son and dad talks, and I was very close to my mom and not my dad.
Yeah.
And so it was one of these that I kind of took all of that into a lot of my relationships, and it brought in a lot of toxicity. And with all this, it was like, okay, what are these coping skills? Well, I'm going to go, I'll drink. Oh, if I drink, I'm more vocal at night and I can talk better at night. That was I started having all these reasons why to drink or why to
Yeah.
use.
Why it's a good idea. Yeah.
So yeah, man, it's a great idea. I'll have a couple beers and you know,
I'll
courage
be
will
honest
come
then.
up. Yeah, and now I can tell you just how I feel, and we'll have a constructive conversation. Well, now all of a sudden I can't control how I'm drinking. Now I'm blacked out and passed out, you know, on the floor. It just 0 to 100 real quick.
Oh yeah. I hear you, man. I know how that goes. Yeah, man. I mean, dude, you said a lot there. This man, first of all, I'm sorry that it goes without saying, but I'm sorry that happened to you. With your father, that's a significant, if we're talking about in my recovery, we talk about big T's and little T's. Little T's are like small traumas, big T's
Uh-huh.
are like big traumas. That would be a big one.
Oh
And
yeah.
it definitely shapes how we think about ourselves, how we think about the world, how we think about being a father. Um, so yeah, man, it goes without saying, but I'm sorry that happened to you. That's a big deal.
No, I appreciate it. I mean, that's actually what got me sober.
Yeah.
Because my wife, 2 years before that, we were separated at the time, but she committed suicide. And
Dude.
we were both addicts. And my
Oh
dad
my
got me
gosh.
and my dad got me actually through that. And that's when my addictions went off the rail. I went hard. I mean, I found out I got a call from Unima County Sheriff's Department. They found my wife's body. She died by asphyxiation in a hotel room, blocked the door and stuff. Um,
Gosh.
and I lived in Orange County. And I got that call, and that I don't even remember. All I remember that night is drinking, and I don't know even how I woke up because I
Yeah.
blacked out. And it just went. I was already an alcoholic and cocaine addict, and now it just went through the roof.
Yeah.
And I got sober, and I was sober for 3 weeks. 7/25/17 is when I got sober.
Okay.
And my whole plan when I got sober was just like every other time. I was going to do it a little different this time though. And my goal was if I make it, you know, 6 months, 6 months, I
Yeah.
can put my whole life back together. All the pieces will be back together. Will be good.
Okay.
And then I'll be the victim. Something will happen, of course, and I'll relapse. It's too hard. It's
Yeah.
okay. And 3 weeks into my sobriety, so 8/13/2017, my dad committed suicide. And I'm 3 weeks sober. I'm like I just was in like shock. And I didn't know how to deal with any of this stuff. This was all trauma that's all underlying, of course, fed into my abandonment trauma. My
Yeah.
birthday's in August. Both of them killed themselves in August. My wife's suicide was 10 days after my birthday, and my dad's suicide was 4 days before my birthday. So even as a kid, your birthday's a big deal to you. You guess what? Um, and so like I've went in so much therapy now when it came to all this
Yeah.
stuff because I ignored it all
Yeah.
because that's what we're supposed to do as men. Fuck this dude, just brush it off and
Yeah. Brush it off, Barry.
it's okay, you know. And that was actually the driving force in my sobriety in the first couple years, and that's why I was so angry in sobriety. Even like I hated fucking people, and everybody had happy lives and go fuck yourselves.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know how to handle all this other stuff that was going on. I wanted to cope so much, but I'm sober.
Yeah.
So it's like,
Like, what do you do with all those? What do you do with that when you're sober, man? I get it.
yeah, and so it was a lot. You know, I had to do a lot of lifestyle changes and stuff, even in moving and getting a divorce and all that stuff, and that all really helped. But it was like, you know, everybody's path of sobriety is just so different, even, you know, of how one person gets clean and sober versus another person.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that comes down to even the addictions of there's so much similarities, but then there's also so many differences.
Yeah.
And finding
Yeah.
kind of what it hits for you of what actually keeps you sober.
Yeah. Dude, yeah, I mean, that's because we're all, it's different for everybody because we've all got different human experiences, man. Like, you know, you know, the things that you've been through with like two people that you dearly loved, like committing suicide, that's big. Other people have other similar issues, you know what I mean? And
Mhm.
harder than that, softer than that, they all impact us, you know what I mean? Like, I was actually trying to think about that more deeply because a buddy of mine in recovery, he was bullied when he was in middle school. And so we related to each other. But as I heard his story, I was like, oh, you got really bullied. I was just like verbally abused. You were like physically, like all this kind of stuff, like legit. So you sort of like minimize your own experience and like, oh, then I don't want to say that I was bullied then because that's real bullying. I just got teased. And I was like minimizing my own trauma. It's all it, whether, you know, I don't know. And even in my own recovery, like, dude, some people have cheated with multiple people. Some people have, you know, hired prostitutes. They've met up with somebody for one night stands and they're married with kids, all this kind of stuff. And then there's people who just watch porn. There's the people that have whatever. So there's all these different like flavors, but like we're all in recovery together.
Right.
And so I think we're all like, so like I don't know, we're all dealing with different things and we're all trying to manage it in similar ways. And I don't know, it's crazy how I don't know, man. It's crazy how hard it is to manage some of these big traumas, like, and even little traumas. It's hard. Like, how do we do it? How do we do it?
I think that's where you almost need, at least for me and what I learned is you need a therapist because I think that's the problem with recovery in a lot of cases.
Mm,
If you try to go it, you know, a 12-step program or whatever type deal. And the main reason is you know, you start sharing, you start being vulnerable and opening up, and you hear all these other people's stories. And then, like you said, you minimize your story because you've lived this and your
yeah,
story isn't that bad all of a sudden. And you
yeah,
always will find people out there worse. And then it's like you almost feel guilty because you're like, well, maybe mine wasn't really that big. And there's no real big supporting factors in your life. You know, you're not at these meetings with your wife or with, you know, family members who are like, no, dude, what you went through was fucking rough, dude. Like,
yeah,
stop,
yeah,
validate this. Where, you know, you when you get a therapist who can put you kind of in check, because that's at least what mine did, was like, hold on a second here, like this is pretty fucked. You realize what's coming out of your mouth. Like you
yeah,
realize it's okay to look in the mirror and go, this fucking was hard for me. Like this was fucking brutal.
yeah,
And you know, not to minimize it because like you said that and man, that just sent my whole like body just fucking
yeah,
clenched because I was the same way as that where you hear you know, a guy's telling me about how, you know, he had a shotgun in his mouth and he pulls the trigger and the fucking bullet didn't go off and stuff. And I'm like, God, dude, that's even worse than where, you know, after I
oh
lost
yeah,
my dad, like I attempted suicide, but I tried to hang myself
yeah,
and you put a gun though, and like, and so everything was then not as important as what this person did.
yeah,
And it's just kind of this compounding thing and I think that's where one of those biggest like relapse areas in sobriety is when you stop acknowledging what your trauma was or what the shit was,
yeah,
and you minimize it. And then as that minimizes, you're not addressing it anymore. And now all of a sudden it's still there, and it starts
yeah.
to haunt you. And next thing you know, somebody's pissing me off. Let me do what makes me feel good. No, not this time. Now I've already started planting that seed in my head, and
Dude, it's so like it's so bizarre sometimes how we make sense of this. Something came to my mind. My over the weekend, my sister and I were talking about business, and she's like kind of engaging in her own interior design business. And one of the things she said was, "I have this mindset where there's a fixed amount of like money out there that if this person's hustling more than me." then like that's less that I'm gonna get. Like that other person's taking away from me, and like so there's less of it for me. And like it's like there's a similarity there to like how we think about our traumas and how we think about the things that have happened to us. Like, oh, if you were bullied more than me, then like I don't know. It's almost like that means mine was less. They can both be significantly impacted. Like it doesn't matter whether it was a shotgun or a noose. Like they're really, really, really traumatic situations there. And it's not like one has, and neither of them have anything to do with each other.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like one doesn't
Uh-huh.
take away from the other. And so we somehow think that like, oh, because I wasn't bullied like that, then mine doesn't count as much now because his counts more or something, which is just like complete BS. You know what I mean?
No, and it is, and the amazing thing, it's funny that you said that because you know, your background is like sales and marketing, and so is mine, and that's always been my mentality. You know, if somebody's making a lot of money, they're stealing my money because
Yeah,
they're
yeah, it's
outworking
fine.
me. Because it
Yeah,
is, it's like there's only 10 units of this out there, so if you got, you know, 6 units, there's only 4 units left for me. You know,
yeah,
but the funny thing is that minimization and stuff comes into even, you know, with your childhood. I think a lot of times, like with our childhood, you know, I think a lot of us have went through childhood trauma.
totally.
And I think we all do, because I don't think, you know, no parent knows exactly what they're doing. You're doing the best that you can, and a lot of us are unhealed with kids or whatever it is. And yeah, you're going to cause some, and hopefully your kids get into therapy and can break different, you know, patterns. But it's amazing, like, because I used to do this all the time. I always believed like I had a really good childhood because my dad was a doctor. We never starved for food. My parents didn't beat me. We never had to get up in the middle of the night to move because we were getting evicted. You know,
Yeah,
I always had, you know, the warm place to sleep. I had my own bed. Like I was so programmed to be, you know, even by my parents, to be grateful for all this stuff.
yeah,
And I'm very grateful that, you know, I wasn't beat by my parents. But as soon as I would hear somebody going, oh, you know, my dad used to hit me, or I know what it's like to starve and stuff, and I'm going, fuck, dude, I really should be grateful for what I had. And I would take all the other shit and be like, you know what, that's all good. I need to work on me, I guess, and just forgive them for that. And it doesn't work that way.
yeah. No, I don't know. The one thing that comes to my mind is how we can we can all sort of like we can relate to each other and also like grieve for each other. You know what I
Uh-huh.
mean? Like one of the things that I've done in recovery is reflected on Nathan as an 8-year-old when I was like first exposed to pornography. And I've thought about that day like thousands and thousands of times throughout my life, is that specific moment in time. And sometimes I'm mad at myself. Why did I do that? Like I think about myself in sort of this ashamed way. I was 8 years old, bro. 8. And I can just go back and like love on that Nathan and like have compassion for that Nathan and be like, it's okay to that Nathan. And I think that's I would encourage anyone who's like beating themselves up for what happened to them as a younger person to have like compassion on themselves and to
Mm-hmm.
look back on the younger version of them and say like that was hard. It's okay. Like you were 8 years old. You were young. I mean, dude, people experience harder things than that when they were younger than that. And I think it's important to have compassion on children who are impacted by significant circumstances. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of those moments, like we didn't know what was going on, like, but those shaped who we became, and we did the like I don't know, we kind of did. You have this survival mode where you do what you can, do what you think is going to work, and I don't know, like
Yeah.
having compassion on our younger versions of ourselves is such like it's really a gift to yourself, you know?
No, and it is, and it's hard to find compassion for yourself and belief for your younger self. Where, you know, a lot of times we just beat ourselves up because we're like, man, if I would have did this instead of this, then none of this would have happened.
Right?
And we're so hard on our younger self because we're like, we're going into it with a 40-year-old, a 45-year-old, mentality versus a 7-year-old or a 10-year-old or a I just want to fit in and what it was like to feel like the outcast. But if I drink with everybody else, then I'm one of them.
Yeah.
And that was the thing that I think like really set me. It didn't set me up for failure, but it's like the stuff that I've talked to so many others about now is the reality of what really peer pressure is.
Mm.
You were taught so much that peer pressure is, oh, if your friends jump off a bridge, are you going to jump off? And they're going to push you to do things that, peer pressure is like three people over there having a lot of fun and you're over here doing something else. So maybe if I do what they're doing, I can have a friend.
Yeah.
I mean, that's essentially kind of what peer pressure really is of like, you're drinking, yeah, I'll try a beer, sure, and now we're all drinking. Wow, if I drink this with these guys, they're all my friends right now, and now I have something in common, and now tomorrow I could talk to them about it. Yeah, let's do it again, and
Yeah.
you don't
It's like
realize.
out of this desire and like this desire for connection and relationship, like we make compromises.
Mm-hmm.
I think, I would even say that like a lot of my stuff, like acting out was like this false sense of connection with this like person on the screen. Like there's no connection, but like
Right.
there's this false sense of connection because what I really want is like the real intimacy and relationship with my wife. You know what I mean? Or like with,
Mm-hmm.
I, I think we're all kind of designed for intimacy and relationship. And and so a lot of us are just seeking that, and a lot of times we'll do things that we normally wouldn't do to get it, and
Right.
and that leads us down some sketchy paths.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
It leads you down sketchy paths. It also leads you to not being authentically yourself.
yeah,
And the problem is you can only be non-authentic for so long until eventually you snap and you're like,
yeah,
I don't like who I'm becoming, and this isn't who I am, and now I'm not seen and heard because you don't know the real me, and it's that self-sabotaging all of a sudden. You do everything you can to fit in,
yeah,
but it's not you, and then it's all of a sudden you just set everybody up to fail you in a sense. And I was really good at doing that in like relationships. I love to be loved.
yeah,
And but once I had love, it was like, okay, that's what I always wanted is just to be loved. But now because of my trauma in my life, this is going to get taken away from me.
mm, yeah,
So let me push it away and get it away because it's going to go regardless.
yeah,
So how can I do this to benefit me? Well, if I'm the victim, I can play poor me and everybody gives me attention and cares for me still. And it sets me up where I can move on a lot easier and all of the, and it's this cycle. And then once you do it once and it works, and then all of a sudden it becomes this belief system and it's hard to stop all the time, that.
yeah, yeah, man. I mean, it's just like we have all these basic, yeah, we have these basic needs um, that we're trying to get met,
Mm-hmm.
and um, and I think that doesn't always happen in a healthy way. And so we sort of, I don't know, either try to find it, like try to find those needs, get those needs met in other unhealthy ways. Um, that's typically how it is like, I mean, yeah, I think it's so common for us to like people's needs not to be met. It's hard to even identify what our needs are. And,
Mm-hmm.
I think, I don't know, I would say all addicts, but a lot of people, like for me, I've dealt with a lot of self-contempt about myself. And so this concept of me needing something, I don't want to need anything from anybody. I don't want to depend on anybody. I want to do it all myself. And it pains me to ask for help. But the reality is we are designed for relationship with each other. And we aren't designed to do it all self. You're going to miss out on massive amount of like a full life if you're
Mhm.
always doing everything yourself. I think that's one of the reasons why I was able to get sober, is because I'd kind of stumbled and fallen for many years, trying these different things to get sober and to like stop doing what I was doing, and it didn't seem to work until I found a recovery group. So I was trying to do it myself for 8 years, and that did not work. And so finally, out of like hitting rock bottom, I joined a group. I found and joined a group. And there I realized, like, I cannot do this alone. And
Right.
I need a community of people to support me and do this with me and relate to me. Um, and in recovery, it works that way in recovery. And I think that works that way in life too.
Really does. And so much of it is finding that group and that almost like that acceptance when you can't even accept yourself.
Mm,
And for people to, it's almost like it's that positive reinforcement that you're always looking for, that
yes.
you get from addicts. Because I mean, it's amazing when you first want to get sober how lonely it is. I mean, that was the worst thing, is how lonely it is. And you're so ashamed and so afraid to ask for help because you feel that no one's ever been there for you before, or oh, no one can understand. And then it's almost like you look back and you've been sober and fought with this and healed through a lot of this, and you look back and it's almost like now you can go, man, if I would have did this
Oh yeah.
differently, like I could have sped it up. And then it's like reminding yourself of like, you can't do that though to other people. I went through this whole thing, like when I first wanted to tell people like, this is how you get sober and this is what you
Yeah.
need to do. And this, because it was me and that was my recovery journey. And then I had to really then realize, okay, wait a minute, all of our journeys are different. So what
Yeah.
is the differences here? You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Totally, man. I think there's, understanding the similarities and differences is like one of the fun parts about recovery, is like you get to hear other people's stories and learn from them. And then you get to like over the years, I think the same way, man. Is just like I wish I would have had all these tools available to me like 8 years before I actually got them. They were
Oh yeah.
available to me. I just didn't have them, and I had to kind of like stumble through and get them. So now my goal is not as much to like tell people this is the one way you get sober, but it's like these are the tools that I didn't have before. Now I have them, and this is like allowing me to live a free life. And kind of just sharing what those tools look like for me seems to work, dude. I mean, we're bursting at the seams in our men's group. It just started two guys, and now there's this week we're on Monday we're breaking out into like 5 separate groups of like 5. So we'll have like 25 people there. And
Oh, that's right.
that doesn't include the other groups that have gone off and like created their own groups.
Uh-huh.
So it's just been like, well, okay, so what is it about this that's like causing, like, why is this growing in the way that it is? So we're doing not, I mean, I don't take a person, I'm not some magician, but like, what is it that we're doing in these groups that is leading, like, is bringing people in? And
Mm-hmm.
so that's some of the stuff that where it's just like, okay, I know what tools have worked for a lot of people. They work for me. They seem to be working for a lot of other people, and then I'll share that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what it is. And stuff like that grows by, people want there's a lot of things with AA that, and even NA and stuff, that I really did agree with.
Yeah.
Like the laws of attraction, of you living a great life, all of a sudden I know what your struggles were. How did you get there? Because I want to get there, type deal.
Yeah.
It's hard because then also though at a certain point it becomes personality over,
Yeah.
even though it's one of the sayings is it's principles over personality. I'm sorry, personalities in a lot of cases unfortunately override the principles. Um, and it is it's just even like with your cousin, I'm sure I don't know what kind of support she had, but even just like hearing you when you were talking about her, it was like somebody who was almost like alone fighting with her own like demons to all of a sudden realize like, oh my God, there's somebody else out there that understands.
Yeah.
To all of a sudden having this conversation to actually be like open about it. I'm sure, even her partner, was probably they probably had a conversation after that of like, oh, I didn't know this or I didn't know that, because she can be real with you versus somebody else because they just don't get it.
Yeah.
And we sometimes forget that there's a lot of people in our lives that just don't get it.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I think there's something, like when us recovery people like spot other recovery people, there's something that like draws us to each other. I think you and I that's the way our relationship started.
Mm-hmm.
We just have common ground, and so I love those moments. I feel like it's almost like what was really like destroying me for very many years, like has turned, and it has turned into something that's like healing me.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that healing is when I can share my own story with other people and they find value or insights or their own healing. You know what I mean? When I'm able to like
Yeah.
impact other people with my own past destruction that's
Mm-hmm.
leading to other people's health, like, dude, that's the magic in my mind. And I'm pretty
It,
clear about that. Like I think my goal in recovery is that, dude, just one person, if I could like tell my story that impacts one person and they're able to, and that leads to recovery for them, dude, like that's that's the magic for me.
and it is, and that's the thing. Like, if you can just help one person, like we all want to help people, we want to see people. I think there's a lot of good in human beings. There really is. And ultimately, especially with addicts, I think because we kind of get our life back, it's almost like we want other people to experience this joy that we've gotten to have now. Because we know,
100%, dude. Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, I tell that story. I still tell that story very often. Is somebody asked me in my group, like, how did, or what would you, oh, well, I don't remember the question, but essentially, like, this is what I do is there was a moment where I was in my darkest place, and you've been in your own darkest place. You talked about being suicidal and attempting suicide. Like for me, I was very close to that. I was just like, dude, it would be better for me to drive off this bridge, because then because I either need to like tell everyone the truth about what I've been doing, which would just hurt everybody, or I can just die and they won't feel any of that pain. Such a lie, dude. That's such a
Mm-hmm.
significant lie, but like
Mm-hmm.
that's where I was at. And long story short is like after many years, I'm a different person than that now.
Right.
And so, and to me, if you would have told, 8 years ago, Nathan on that bridge that like this is how I'd be living my life, I would have never believed. He would have never believed me. You know what I mean? Like, I just wouldn't. I had never seen that as a possibility in my life to live how I'm living today. And to me, that is like, and if I can do it, anybody can do it. And I want everyone to have that experience where they were
Mm-hmm.
hopeless and now they're full of hope. That is just like a transformation that I want everyone who's an addict, every addict, to experience that transformation.
No, tremendously, and I think that's what it's all about. Is even when you are getting sober and you're deciding to change your life, you have to have blind faith. I don't care what your religion is, or if you have no religion, whatever, it doesn't fucking matter. You just have to have blind faith that it will get better,
Yeah.
because that's the whole reality of it. Like, even man, 2 years into my sobriety, I hated my sobriety. If you would have told me the life I had right now, 2 years into my sobriety, I would have looked at you and been like, "Oh fuck, dude, that would have changed my whole outlook and my mind."
Yeah.
I held on to hope that it would get better because everyone kept telling me it was, and I kept thinking maybe I'm just stupid. Like, I just keep, oh, it's not getting any better, guys, but you keep
Yeah.
telling me it will. Uh,
Yeah.
but it's if you hold on to that hope, it's like you start looking back and you start finding this weird gratitude all of a sudden of like, holy shit, like this is where I was just a year ago. This is where I was 2 years ago. This is where, and then all of a sudden you get to where you got sober, and then and you're like, God, like it's such a transformation. But
Yeah.
at the time, so much of that time you felt so hopeless and that it was never going to get better,
Yeah.
and like it was the darkest it was ever going to be. And
Yeah.
it's amazing what happens when you make that, when you still grasp onto like that straw.
Oh yeah, I agree, man. I like that story is so important because, like I said, I just want everyone to have that experience, dude. Anyone who's struggled like me with whether it's, my flavor of addiction or not, like I don't think it's possible for everyone to have a full life, no matter what has happened to you. Yes, it will be hard to like overcome some of these things. And dude, I mean, how do you ever really like, you never really get over your own father and your own spouse like committing suicide, but you do like become a new version of yourself, after that all happens. I'm assuming I shouldn't actually speak for you because I didn't live that experience, but you
But
seem
you
like
have something in
you
your
seem
life
like
that
a hopeful person today, and that's encouraging to me.
and that's the thing though is you can always draw from other people's emotions in that way of like putting yourself almost in their place of going, I empathize
Mm,
because we've been to dark places before,
yeah.
and it's like you almost like never forget what it was like to be in some of those places, and you're like, fuck, man.
I know, dude.
And it sucks, and that's the thing of like turn into somebody who's amazing. I mean, I think addicts are the most amazing human beings in the world because you've already been to hell. Like you've been to the darkest corner of the planet, man. You've been to your
Yeah.
fucking brain and your own thoughts by yourself.
Yeah.
And like the outlook in life and what addicts, in recovery can accomplish and create is because you what am I going to fail at? I'm not failing. I'm sober. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that
Yeah.
that weird place where so many people are so worried about failing. We can't fail unless we relapse in our brain. So
Mm,
we'll never fail at whatever the fuck we do. It's just
yeah.
another learning experience, and we know what it's like to just keep holding on to hope and how that hope changes and grows and shifts, and it keeps driving you forward. And some of the most successful people in the world that I meet are addicts in recovery, and it's like, okay, yeah, that makes sense because
Yeah.
like your definition of failure is so different than everybody else.
Yeah. That's a great point, man. That's a great point. I love that perspective.
Yeah, it's almost a blessing. I mean, one of the things like I'm grateful for, at least with sobriety, is at least I could take a good mindset from it.
Amazing.
But no,
Dude.
I love talking with you, man, because it's like even in like we're both with Sunflower Sober and we're in that Slack group and stuff, and like you can tell who's addicts and who's not. It's
Yeah.
very easy to point like to, and it's funny because like I remember when you had first like kind of started talking, because like I didn't know who anybody was, and
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the cross communication wasn't like the greatest. Like, hey, by the way, this is who this person is, or any of this. And I remember I just even when he put me in the group, I'm just like, what am I doing here? Like, who are these people? And I really quickly realized none of them were addicts,
Yeah.
like addicts. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
nicotine and stuff. And I get and Kobe, I do
Sure.
respect with the weed because I know a lot about weed addiction. So
Yeah.
yeah, I really gravitated towards him.
Yeah.
And then when you started kind of talking, I was like, just the way you talked, you were like, you're an addict. I know your language.
Yes.
And so
Yeah,
I was
man.
like,
Like I said, it's like game knows game, man. Like
uh-huh,
you can we pick up on things that, I don't know, dude. It's probably like, so I've never done drugs before.
uh-huh,
But I can guarantee you that people who like smoke weed, like
uh-huh.
when you're around someone that you don't know, after a few minutes, if you're somebody who smokes weed, you know if the other person smokes weed or not.
Oh, dude. It's so funny that you had that conversation because I just had this conversation actually today of
Yeah,
how you could be you could love hydrocodones, man. You could love Norco opiates.
yeah,
In a week at a job, at a new job, in 1 week, you will know everybody else who pops pills. You
crazy.
you know your own. It's
Yeah,
so you know these little hints to drop and these little things that you will in a week you'll know, oh, this person's on Vicodin, this person's this, man, if I run out, they have a plug that could hook me up. Like, it's
Yeah.
amazing how it is when it
Yeah.
comes to addictions, and
Yeah.
you are like, you're just drawn to each other.